Well, we've got correspondents standing by. Our diplomatic editor James Bay is at the UN in New York. Jackie Rowland is in Paris, but let's start first with Barnaby Phillips, who is in Moscow. And Barnaby, when we're talking about the draft resolution, there are some parts of the French resolution that Russia is not happy with.
I think that might be a euphemism. There are some parts of the draft resolution which are not acceptable to the Russians. They don't want to see the threat of force being employed against their Syrian allies. Their argument is that they have pulled off a diplomatic coup. They are getting the Syrians to admit to the world explicitly that they have a significant chemical arsenal. They're prepared to reveal this arsenal. They're prepared to join the Chemical Weapons Convention. Implicit in that is an acknowledgement that the Syrian regime's chemical weapons will be destroyed. The Russians are saying, look what we've delivered. It's not wise to threaten the Syrians now. It's illogical, in fact. Let's go with the process that we have. And the Russians think they have a strong case, a strong card in their hands, and that, I think, is President Obama's domestic weakness. His lack of support in Congress, his lack of popular support, and these are the issues which are going to be hammered out at the end of this week when John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, meet in Geneva.
Barnaby, thanks for that. Let's go to Jackie Rowland in Paris. And Jackie, the French resolution is a tough one. Implicit in it is the threat of military action if Syria doesn't comply.
That's certainly something which the French would ideally like to be within the final draft that will be presented, according to their plans at least, to the UN Security Council for a vote. Certainly when the French Foreign Minister was outlining on Tuesday what he wanted the resolution to include, there was a condemnation and an attribution of culpability for the August the 21st attack on the regime of Bashar al-Assad, an element of the resolution to vow to bring the perpetrators to international justice, and also, as you say, this implicit threat that if Damascus does not comply with the new mechanism for controlling chemical weapons, then the international community could still resort, after all, to military action. Now, the French are showing some flexibility on the wording of their draft resolution. They've said that within certain limits they can change things, but they underline that the broad principles and objectives must remain intact, namely a resolution that's robust enough to prevent the Syrian regime from ever again threatening either its own people or anyone else with the use of chemical weapons.
So, Jackie, what has France said about the Russian reservations? You said that they were prepared to be flexible. How flexible?
Well, as I said, they've said within limits. One French official made a rather sarcastic remark, one might say, by saying he didn't quite understand how the Russians could already be objecting since they hadn't yet even seen the draft, or at that stage when the spokesman was speaking, the Russians couldn't at that stage have seen the draft. France had only mentioned, the foreign minister had mentioned what elements he hoped to include. The French will be looking, as they said, to maintain these broad principles, namely a clear deterrent for the Syrian regime to use chemical weapons again. France has all along been one of the most firm advocates of the threat of military action. The French and the Americans really stood alone for quite a while, and the French are continuing to maintain that threat. For example, the defence minister will be visiting troops on Thursday. The French see it as being psychologically very important to maintain a credible threat of using military force in order to keep up the political pressure on the Syrians.